Sure by Tumble and Lochranach and Lochaber I will go, by the head of Rex may heaven in the wilds. If it's thinking in your inner hand, the braggarts in my step, you've never smelt the tangle o' the isles.
So time to move to the Western player, which might be the trickier one because he has to play reactively and you cannot necessarily come up with a solid kind of strategy. However, let's start with the production. Just like the Soviets, your main hindrance early is your industry level and your relatively high industry cost. I remind you that initially USA is neutral to you, so your industry raising cost is even higher. So the first thought that might come to mind again is spending your limited production of 7 to draw some investment cards or a whole lot of investment cards and possibly raise your industry a bit to have a little better production later. However, this is not necessarily the best course of action because it will slow you down in 1936 and you might already be facing a whole lot of problems from the get-go as early as 1936. Of course, it is not necessarily bad to draw a bunch of investment cards, but you should most likely focus a bit on technologies. For example, naval radar might be your friend here because it will defend you against the ability of the Germans to launch an early Kriegsmarine operation in the Atlantic and decimate your for combat value fleet, which is your main power. By the way, it's always a good idea to complement your fleet by some carriers. However, be careful not to build up your carrier more than you do the fleet, because in this case, the highest combat value unit has to absorb the damage if it is naval units. And I remind you that the carriers take double damage. So in this case, if a hit is generated onto naval units, you have to allocate it to the carrier and it would go down by 2 combat values. So always try to escort your carriers with fleets. So a very good move early, actually a must move, would be to move a carrier here into North Sea so as to deny the Germans the early access to Britain for a possible Sea Lion operation, because in this case they cannot actually bypass you if they declare war upon you. They have to stop here, and even if they have the surprise element of the war declaration, the carrier will be firing or retreating before the German ship has a chance to fire back. Also, as we previously mentioned when concerning the Germans, Luftwaffe is your friend as the Germans. So you also have to defend London from some kind of air raids early. And the best counter for that would be air defense radar, which would allow your air forces to fire double dice when defending against enemy air forces in home territory. So there are some pretty important technologies that you might like to try to fish out early, and I have not even mentioned motorized infantry or heavy tanks or whatever, because not only will they save you from some early game disaster, but they will also dictate your strategy for the rest of the game. So for example, if you happen to draw naval radar, you know that you can commit a large part of your production into ships and try to dominate the seas. Or if you draw air defense radar or some other air forces technologies, you can boost your air forces in the later years. And if you respectively draw some technologies for tanks or for infantry, you can build up your tanks or infantry and try to advance through land. Now, of course, it's not a good idea to advance into the Germans early, but during mid to late game, when the German player possibly is committed to another front, I'm looking to you, Soviets, it might be a good idea to counterattack the Germans by exploiting their weaknesses, and possibly their big liability would be Munich, because you can reach Munich through Lorraine, and they will probably be building the bulk of their forces in Ruhr and Berlin and not have heavily fortified Munich. Also, don't forget that it might be a good idea to build a whole bunch of airplanes or carriers or fleets early and bombard Ruhr in 1936 so as to lower the German production early on. And as with the Soviets, you might want to use up some diplomacy cards or action cards to deny the Germans the resources they need and slow down their early game production. And then you can start raiding them regularly in order to hurt their defenses and offensive capabilities, as well as dropping their production levels. So, in many cases, I would say it would not be a good idea to invest into industry as early as 1936, but maybe you want to build up your defenses first, like fortifying Paris or London, or building up your fleets or air forces, and possibly even drawing some action cards so that you save yourself in 1936, and later on, after securing some early defense, you can go on the offensive later on in the game. Also, I would like to mention that according to the latest game changes, the Western player also gets one extra cadre in setup in one area where they already have a British unit. So it might be one extra fleet in London, or possibly some fleet in Gibraltar to annoy the Italians or prevent some blockade actions, or possibly some unit in Suez or even India, an extra one. And I would also like to point out that these are colonies, and do never forget about that, which means you cannot build extra units beside the ones you have at the setup. You cannot build new cadres there, just upgrade your already existing units. So you might not want to build an initial fort in Suez as your setup unit. You might want to build a tank, for example, which is best suited for desert combat, and then you can build a fort even if it is a colony. So forts are better built during production, and during setup you might want to allocate some extra units not named forts in your colonies. Now, when it comes to mid-game, and after having secured your early game survival, you might want to go on the offensive, and a good game plan would be to actually take down Rome. Of course, you have got to pay some close attention to where the Axis player has been building their units, and to a large extent this is a game of memory, of watching which units have been built up. So if you notice that the German player is mainly building in Germany and has neglected his production in Italy, then maybe it is time to attack the Italians. The Italian player has 2 units in Milan, 2 units in Tripoli, Libya, and 4 units in Rome, which might be of various types. And notice that he is limited at building only 2 forts at max. So he has to either leave Milan or Rome or Tripoli unprotected. And after scouting a bit, you might want to attack his weakest point, which might be Milan, to deny him this one resource, or possibly Tripoli. And you might want to pincer Tripoli by using these 2 tanks for example. And after that, possibly secure some foothold in Malta and Sicily. And in this case, you may very well manage to bring these guys out of supply by blocking their path to Rome. Or maybe you want to take the risky path to Milan, but in this case I have to warn you that this alpine path is very tricky. It has only got a mountain border of 1 unit, so if you bring 1 infantry, this might very well be taken down by a build-up fort here. So you again have to complement it with a sea invasion from Marseille, and then you might even find yourself in trouble by being cut off supply, for example. So maybe oftentimes the best way is to bypass Milan and use these land areas through North Africa, or even sea invade from France, and then, just like the Allies did historically, land in Italy and Salerno and work your way northwards. When talking about this front, the Indian one, you mainly want to play defensively here, because the Soviets will in most cases try to attack you and conquer you here. So you might want to build up just the necessary forces to defend India. And if the Soviets get too aggressive, you might even want to cut them off supply, for example. And most likely you want to just buy time here. But of course, every game is different than the rest. So, for example, if the Soviets have been heavily engaged with the Germans at their western front and Persia is left unharmed, or if you have managed to diplomatically conquer Persia, for example, maybe at some point you can use it to reach Baku and possibly secure your second capital and win the game. But this is a rare case, and in most cases you want to play it rather safe in India. Now, of course, a viable idea would be to copy the Soviet plan a bit and use some sacrificial lambs as early as spring 1936 and attack Warsaw and Stockholm, for example. So, by violating those and by closely and carefully watching which cards the Germans and the Soviets have played, making sure that the Soviets intervene in Poland and the Germans possibly intervene in Sweden, so that they both declare war upon you, and also in this way you guarantee that they will be slaughtering each other for the rest of the game. And in this case, you might secure yourself a double declaration of war, and this would significantly drop your industry cost. And if you manage to do this, then you could more safely raise your industry. However, the main concern of the West is blockades, so at least try to make sure to establish a proper trade route path from India, either through the Mediterranean or through the Atlantic Ocean, if need be. And notice that this path has to only consist of a sea segment and a land segment, so you might have to use this land segment, for example, and then switch into sea or something similar. And for all these purposes, try not to lose Malta, because it will deny your sea segment. Or if the Italians block this area, for example, then you are totally walled in here. So try not to lose these areas and secure your trade route path. Also, try to put one influence onto America, because this will provide you 4 nice and tasty resources, as well as 3 population, which might save your day early on. Again, you have to worry about the blockades by either German or Italian or possibly even Soviet units, but your superior navy can probably handle them in most cases. And when talking about late game, this is your power, this is where you shine. When talking about these years, 1940 onwards, you will try to secure some influence in the USA, so that you make sure these units come in play. And while it might not be the end of the world missing out these 1 combat value units, these ones are pretty brutal. And all these American guys arrive at a pretty significant combat value. And do not also forget that you may build them up during the year's production. So they come at this combat value or this combat value, and you can even use your production to build them up further. So all these units, if not blocked by some annoying Italian or German unit here, can strategically move and help England and possibly France if it is taken by the German player, or advance your plan of invasion into Germany. So for the most part, you might want to play defensive early and mid-game, and after securing some trade routes for purposes of blockade and some nice production and sea and air dominance, then you can use these lovely guys from America to invade the land and finish off the Germans once and for all. Also notice that if the German player has the naughty idea of violating America, then these units can even arrive in disputed territory. So even if both these areas are occupied, the units will arrive even in disputed territory. And by the way, I think it is a terrible idea as the German player to violate America, while you might possibly want to do it as either the German or the Soviet player during some kind of deal with the Western player in order to have them fight the other player. So in most cases, this is disastrous for the Germans. But for the sake of fun, let's try to elaborate a bit on that. So the violation of America, I remind, is when the German or Soviet players enter Canada or the German player invades America itself. And in order to do this as the German player, of course you have to use Denmark or Ireland as your staging point for your infantry. And let's not forget that Iceland belongs to Denmark, so Denmark is very good for you anyway early, so you might find yourself in the position of having conquered Denmark, and thus you can use Iceland as your base, which to some extent historically happened. And then you have to move your units strategically into North Atlantic and then invade Washington or New York or Canada. But all this comes at the huge risk of being cut off supply just by North Sea or English Channel and the North Sea or Norwegian Sea, for example. So in order to do this, you have to have secured total dominance of the seas. So you have to have eliminated the British naval power. And after that, okay, you might be able to build a series of sea-controlled areas and transport your units there. And after all that, you have to either land in Canada by possibly using some land-deep ship tanks to take advantage of the two ground units sea invading through its border. And you might even want to bring a whole bunch of air forces to take down the infamous 2 combat value forts of New York and the 4 combat value forts of Washington. And in this case, oftentimes the best course of action is to kind of confuse the forts by sending, for example, a 2 combat value infantry and at the same time a whole bunch of air forces or naval units, so as to make them face a dilemma of whether they want to divert these 4 hits into ground units or into other classes of units. And if they decide to fire your fleets, for example, and the air forces deal some significant damage, then your ground units can fight the fort later on. The point is that you have to also face all these infantry and tank and naval and air forces that will come instantly into America. And during the next year's production, you will also be facing even stronger guys. And even if you manage to do this, then this means you would probably already have the power to take down London and Paris. So instead of going for this kind of shenanigans, you might want to just finish off London and Paris and win the game earlier. Maybe the time to do this would be when every single American leaves the USA and leaves some gaps to be exploited. But I think for the most part you want to stay clear of USA and save this kind of strategies for the Conquest and Tragedy game, which consists of mixing this one with Conquest and Consequence, because this one requires the capture of 4 enemy capitals, and in this case maybe you would do as well as conquering Paris, London, and subsequently Washington. But that's a story for another game, another tutorial, another episode. Thank you guys for watching till the end. I will gladly answer any comments of yours. And after that, stay tuned, as we will be doing a whole bunch of playthrough action. Enjoy!
If it's thinking in your inner hand with raggarts in my step, you've never smelt the tangle o' the Isles.